All right. So thank you everyone again for joining us today. Depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Avi Stamen, and I am the CEO of Academic Language Experts. Thank you for joining us. This is the 5th installment of our Publication Success Interview Series. And if you've joined us before, you'll know that every month I speak with innovative thought leaders in the field of academia or in the world of academia about how they're influencing academic publishing in the hopes of trying to create a bridge between academic authors and academic publishers and improve the dialogue and communication between them. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephanie Paulvast, who is the head of open research at Brill. There may be no other topic that's so critical to the future of academic publishing and about which we know so very little, such as open access. Open access is slowly but surely reshaping the scientific world and making research available to the masses. However, at the same time, it's putting a tremendous burden on researchers who don't necessarily have the money or resources to support the open access publication. So in our discussion today, we're going to discuss how scholars can go about making their research open while trying to make it affordable, but also avoiding dangerous pitfalls along the way. I urge you not to be shy, ask questions on the Zoom chat as they come up. We might not be able to get to them right away, but there is a time at the end of the session that we're going to be addressing specific questions from the audience. And if you have a more personal question, or if your question is not answered during the session, you're welcome to follow up. Stephanie and I will both be sharing our contact information, and you can follow up with us after the session and ask us any questions. You can also send us a chat or on a private chat. The interview is being recorded, and anyone who's registered, whether you've joined us today, thank you, or whether you're joining us just for the recording, you'll be able to receive the recording in the next 72 hours. And we'll send that out via email. Before we kick off the event, I want to share some of our exciting achievements. We're grateful and proud at Academic Language Experts to have helped scholars translate, edit, and prepare their research in over 50 languages. Articles and books we worked on in 2020 were published with top academic publishers around the world, including Yale University Press, Harvard University Press, Cambridge University Press, and of course, Brill. At Academic Language Experts, we provide customized translation, editing, and academic support services to researchers, scientists, and other professionals to help them produce publication-ready texts at the highest level. We also help scholars looking for help polishing their book proposals prior to submission to their dream publisher. So if that's something you're looking to do, please do be in touch. It's our mission to help authors achieve publication success and be a source of guidance and support along the way. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie Paulvast, for the last 5 years, has been at the forefront of open access publishing. After a stint at Utrecht University as an open access publisher, Stephanie rejoined the team at Brill as head of research, where she is responsible for overseeing all open access books and journal publishing. Yeah. Stephanie's leadership, Brill is growing one of the largest open access book publishers in the humanities and social sciences.
Not a good time right now.
Stephanie, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, here I am.
There we go. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Avi. Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. And like I said, to talk about open access. It's really a bit of an indulgence for me to be able to talk about my topic this next 30 minutes or so. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's joining us and listening in.
Right. All right. So I want to start off with a quick exercise to get everyone involved, but also just to get a feel for the crowd and for the audience. And I want to ask everyone to quickly take no more than 15 seconds and do a free association exercise. When we hear the words open access, what exactly do you think of? It doesn't need to be long sentences, just 1 or 2 words. Jot them down in the chat and share with everyone. What does open access mean to you when you hear those words? Yeah, see, this is why I'm very happy that we did this, because the range, I don't know, if everyone's reading all the other answers, but the range of answers here is pretty incredible. Something from, incredibly expensive to, to the future of academic publishing, to public engagement, democratization of knowledge. I think that's definitely true. Expensive for authors, right? It's quite incredible how one topic can have so many positive and negative attributes at the same time. And I think that's kind of why Stephanie and I decided to do a session on this topic, is because there's sort of this, dichotomy of that's involved. Stephanie, any thoughts about, some of the comments that are rolling in?
Yeah, I mean, they're familiar, of course, and I'm sure that we'll touch on, and well, I mean, looking at them, I think that we'll touch on everything in the course of this interview. So that's reassuring. Nothing wildly unfamiliar, but yeah, it is very interesting. It's such a kaleidoscopic topic, and indeed there are so many aspects, and that's also why I'm really happy that we can do sessions like these, so that we can really hopefully provide a little bit of clarification.
Okay, so I think we've done enough of surrounding the topic. Let's jump straight in. Can you try and define for us, and I know that's easier said than done, but could you try and define for us, what does open access mean? What's it all about? And also maybe a little bit of the background of how it came to be. What's the history of open access?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I think it was already mentioned a couple of times in the chat. Basically, in its essence, of course, open access means that a publication is available to anyone, anywhere, for free. So there's the accessibility component. The other important component that sometimes people maybe forget about is sort of the reuse component. So copyright for open access is usually with the author, but the idea of open access is not just that it gives access to research, but also that it really enables other people to use that research, to really accelerate research and new developments. And so that reuse component, that's helped by a specific type of license that determines, the extent that that publication can be reused. So that's really the basics. Of course, another component that was also mentioned in the chat is that indeed the publisher can't sell the publication, so they need to recoup their costs in another way. And I'm sure that we'll touch on that at length also in the course of this interview. Maybe a little bit about the background. I mean, I think open access has gained a lot of traction the last sort of decade or so, but it's actually a little bit older than that. It's really going back to the early 1990s, and it really directly as a result of the advent, the rise of the internet. And when that developed, already some fields in the early 1990s already started to publicly publish their research online, for instance in physics, and actually some of those efforts continue today. Of course, there's always been a very ideological component there as well. This idea to make research available to anyone, anywhere, without barriers. So that really developed during the 90s and the early 2000s. And then there was really a watershed moment in 2003 with the publication of the Berlin Declaration on Open Access. And essentially, this was a set of guidelines that really, for the first time, formally defined open access. It had a few requirements also on reuse, what I just said. And it has also been really instrumental in sort of accelerating open access policies from funders and also from institutions.
Got it. So let me ask you what might be an uncomfortable question for someone in your position, but if this ideal of open access seems to be so basic, I can think of so many different applications, from the very practical frustration of any of the researchers sitting in this room who've come up against a paywall that they can't access and have to debate whether they want to shell out their own money to access the research, to even just a family who has a sick relative who wants to better understand what disease they have and what are the potential treatment plans. it seems pretty obvious that open research is a beneficial thing to society, to science, and to the world. So why was there a pushback from some publishers, especially some of the big publishers, and why were they hesitant to adopt the open access models? Do you think it was just a monetary financial issue, or were there some inherent problems that they noticed and saw that weren't being addressed?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think, they were against it per se, because as you say, nobody can be against, the benefits of research being openly available anywhere to anyone. So I don't think there was a dark motive. But, from my understanding, this was also definitely the case in the sort of the early days of open access, maybe when it was really, the concept was there, but it was still very much an ideological concept. And publishers are also deeply pragmatic, so they want to make things happen. And I think there were a lot of question marks at the time, like how can we make this happen? How can we recoup these costs? What business models should we use? So I think that was really the key there. And of course, many publishers really embraced open access now, even sort of the bigger publishers that were initially maybe a little bit more hesitant. Recently, the University of California made a big agreement with Elsevier, for instance, which was in a way almost another watershed moment. But I think from Brill's perspective, what's maybe even more important is that not just in the STEM fields and the big publishers, they adopted and embraced open access, but it's also really grown in the last 5 years or so in humanities and social sciences, and also, among smaller publishers, society publishers, medium-sized publishers. And yeah, that is a great development, especially the last 2 years. There really have been a lot of there's been a lot of experimentation with different models and with different services to make open access more inclusive, if you will. So I think that's definitely the spirit we're in now.
So because you mentioned the University of California and the story there, I just want to give a little bit more background and maybe ask you a follow-up about that. Obviously, it's not, this was not involving Brill, but there's from what I understand, and please correct me if I get any of the details wrong, the main or one of the main funding sources for publishers is that they sell big bundles of either journals or series to university libraries, and university libraries determine on a case-by-case basis what research they want to purchase for their institution, and that's what enables the researchers to have the access that they need in order to read and to learn from the research. And slowly over time, some of those prices sort of went up incrementally or even went up exponentially to the point where the University of California turned around and said that they're no longer coming to an agreement with Elsevier, and they refused to purchase their journals, which on the one hand was quite the stand in terms of the statement it made. On the other hand, probably was quite crippling to some of the researchers at the university who weren't able to access some of that research. So can you just talk for a minute? And as you mentioned, since then, they have come to an understanding, they have come to an agreement, which I think is probably in the best interest of everybody, and hopefully pushes us forward. But can you just comment on that and just tell us, I'm not asking you to comment specifically on Elsevier, but that story and what you think we can learn from it in terms of how open access maybe should or should not be rolled out, or how we should approach that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so I can't comment for Elsevier, of course, because I have no idea about sort of the details that were at play there from either side. I mean, in essence, what I think from our perspective, from Brill's perspective, I mean, there have been this idea with the big packages that went up and up in price. Obviously, that hasn't been a good development, and that has also been difficult for us as sort of a medium-sized publisher, because we're sort of in the middle of that. We really don't have those prices or those developments, but there has been a lot of it has really damaged for a while, I think, the sort of the reputation of the industry as a whole. So, you know, in that sense, I think where we were all sort of that was really a bit disappointing, you know, that we had so much tension instead of kind of working towards something together with the libraries. So, you know, in that sense, really happy that it is resolved. You know, I think it's difficult because their scale is so very different, and it's you know, where that's going to go, I'm not so sure. You know, you can get into some kind of philosophizing about consolidation and all of that in any kind of industry, I suppose, but you know, that's not really relevant for now, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, good to mention that for publishers like Brill, these kind of agreements are actually very interesting, sort of medium-sized publishers, because but maybe we'll also get to that later, but because they do create open access opportunity for authors that don't usually have access to open access otherwise. So you know, there's not a lot of funding in the humanities and social sciences. So if we don't make agreements with libraries, basically it will be really difficult to make that work. So I am convinced that's yeah, why it is really good that Elsevier has been able to reach an agreement. You know, the way forward is really working together, you know, with funders, but also definitely with libraries.
Right. Okay, I want to change. Course for a second, and ask you specifically about your you know, your role and what your day to day as you know, head of open access at Brill. What does that look like? What exactly does your work entail? How do you work together with authors? And you know, what does your day, you know, consist of?
Yeah, that's I mean, it's super versatile. It's a very what we already saw, you know, it's such a kaleidoscope. So that also means that there are a lot of you know, it's a really dynamic role. But essentially, I manage and develop Brill's open program. So I, you know, keep track of all the open access publications that we do. I work and I advise our publishers, but of course also our authors and our editors on you know, new open access projects. And I try to make sure that the services that we offer are up to date with market developments. So that also means that I really follow closely funder policy developments, because they also have a big impact, of course, on how open access develops. And also, you know, keeping close touch with university libraries and by consequence also our sales team, who are of course the main sort of contact with with the university libraries and universities, you know, to kind of really see what their needs are and their changing needs in open access. And one of the things in particular that we have been working on really the past couple of years is to make it more inclusive, if you will. So yeah, what I just said, give authors without funding also the opportunity to publish in open access, and really be creative in finding options to fund open access if there is no research funding available. So that entails, for instance, crowdfunding, but also agreements with institutions. We actually already have 4, so we're really proud of that. But we also do partnerships with institutions or with societies, for instance. So yeah, I think we're definitely on the right track there.
So if I'm an author and let's say I have a manuscript that I, you know, either a journal article or even a full-length manuscript that I think, you know, it would be great if this was open access and, you know, could get out to more people on a larger scale, because I think that will be, you know, important. How would that work? Are all of the individual acquisitions editors or journal editors, are they trained to know how to deal with that? Or if I'm an author, do I contact you and ask you about it? Like, how does that, you know, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's usually the contact is, of course, with the acquisitions editor or the associate editor. You know, they are usually the first point of contact for the author, but then at that point they will usually involve me in the conversation, so that we can kind of have a 3-way conversation. You know, what do they actually want, and to really collaborate on their ideas together. That's more for the bigger projects. For the sort of smaller projects and the journal articles, we also, of course, have our own open access contact point, openaccess@brill.com, where everyone is free to send any questions they have for their open access publishing, or just sort of random questions that they have. And we also get a lot of questions there. Yeah, so it depends a little bit, but I hope we're visible enough.
Okay, so let me ask you, I want to get a little bit practical and pragmatic for a minute. And I've seen that this is a question that has come up in the chat, and it's actually was on my list of questions that I wanted to ask you. So that always works out nicely when minds meet. Is there a difference in terms of the quality? There seems to be this theory out there that there's a difference in terms of the quality of research or the review process that an open access either paper or full-length manuscript will go through, as opposed to a traditional article or book. Is there a difference in the level of scrutiny in terms of peer review and the review process between open access and traditional publishing, or are we mixing up two different categories?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And maybe that's also kind of the legacy, if you will, of the whole predatory publishing thing that maybe we will discuss later on. But I mean, essentially, there is no difference whatsoever in the workflow. So
is Stephanie, you with us?
And you have the same quality control, whether it's open
Stephanie,
access or not.
Stephanie.
Open access is just an aspect in the process. Oh.
I apologize. I think you may have gotten cut off there for a minute. So could you repeat that last sentence or two?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, so the process is exactly the same, regardless of whether a publication is open or not. We peer review all our publications, I think usually double blind. So there is absolutely no difference whatsoever. And open access is just an aspect in the process, but it's completely, how do you say that, besides the quality control and the editorial control and the editorial screening.
Yeah, I think what might happen is that sometimes I think people may confuse open access with preprints, where preprints are a version of the article that can be thrown up online maybe before it's really been through the thorough peer review process. This was actually, I know, a big issue. It continues to be an issue with the corona pandemic, is that researchers, in the hopes of trying to get their research out there quickly, would put up an article or a study that they did in order to, for other scientists to be able to access it before it goes through the whole peer review process. And then sometimes journalists would sort of pick up on it and quote it in mainstream newspapers, and then it was disproven later on. So creates all these issues. And I think that sometimes, I wonder if sometimes, there's a confusion between preprints, which is before the peer review process, and then open access, which is in theory after the a full review process. As you mentioned, in fact, I think I saw recently that out of the top 10 science journals, I know we're humanities and social sciences is our focus today, but in the science journals, I think 6 out of the top 10 journals are now open access, or at least have an open access option. So I think that definitely demonstrates that it doesn't necessarily impact the quality or rigor of the review process. That's an important, I think that's one of the important myths that's out there. That being said, we'll talk about predatory publishers and how that came about and why people should be very vigilant and watch carefully. But I want to ask you a similar question, but related question, but a little bit different. And that question is a question of impact, right? So is there a practical, aside from the ideological, which I think most of us can agree on, that there's an ideological benefit, or there's a scientific benefit in just making research open to as many and as far-reaching as possible. But is there a very practical impact in terms of career, in terms of citations, let's say? Have you seen that there's any difference between articles that are published traditionally or articles that are published open access in terms of what impact they're having on research? I guess open access has been around long enough that we can start trying to take a look at some of those issues and compare and contrast.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there really is a difference. And to illustrate that, maybe it's good to mention a study that Springer Nature actually did in 2018. They sampled 74,000 articles that they published, both open access as well as not open access, and to indeed find out the impact. And the results were really impressive. They found that open access articles on average are downloaded 4 times more often than sort of comparable articles that are not published in open access. They're cited 1.5 times more often, also more quickly after publication. And they had a sort of altmetrics activity 2.5 times more often. So that means sort of activity on social media, but it can also be sort of mentioned in newspapers or in policy making, or that's what altmetrics tracks. And April, I think we see more or less the same numbers for journal articles as well as for books, actually, interestingly. And what is an additional, what's also really interesting is that we see that you really do reach a global audience, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. But we see that in particular for sort of local studies. So say that we publish something on music in Brazil, and it's published in open access, then we can really see a peak of activity, peak of downloads from Brazil. Even compared to kind of another publication also in open access, but not necessarily on on Brazil. So that's also really really interesting that you really have very targeted reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were chatting about this yesterday. We were talking about, conferences and how conferences have just become so much more equitable in the sense that, you don't need to pay for an expensive flight and then an expensive hotel to attend a conference. You just need, a computer and some internet access, and that's enough to attend nowadays, or at least some conferences. And I think it's similar with open access, which, and I think maybe this is a point that gets overlooked, is aside from making research accessible to researchers in places where they have a strong infrastructure for research. There are also many researchers whose institutions don't support these big packages that are sold to the libraries, and they don't have the funding for it. And developing countries, whereby making that research accessible actually is the difference between being able to do the research and not being able to do it. And I think that we've, maybe a secondary result of this is that you will see more and more research that's coming from developing countries because they now have the access to the background and the literature that they need in order to conduct their own studies, or to try and replicate studies that have been done in other places and see how they come out locally. So that's really interesting what you're saying about the local impact of open access. You would think, okay, now it's just everyone's going to download it from everywhere, but I guess it also makes a difference on a local level. Fantastic. Okay. Now, all right, let's get into the what is the elephant in the room, maybe, and that is the question of financing and money. I think we've said a number of times that in principle, the concept of open access is nice. It's nice until you come to a to publish your article and they say, okay, that'll be 4,500 euro, and you turn around and say, oh wait, where am I supposed to find that money from, and who's paying for that? So exactly what was supposed to help researchers, this concept of open access. I even spoke to one head of a research office who told me that she discourages her her faculty from publishing open access because it's just so costly, and she keeps on getting requests from researchers, can you pay for another $1,000 or another $2,000, and that's in institutions where they will support either partially or fully, but in institutions where they don't, I mean, they're really asking beyond all the other expenses that researchers have to shell out a lot of money out of pocket. So do you think this is a sustainable model, asking researchers or having the burden or the onus of the financial responsibility be on the researchers? And if it's not, like, how do we get past it? Or is there any other models that you can see that you think are viable and sustainable that can actually support open access without just, making the researchers bankrupt while they're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's also, funnily enough, that's one of the advantages, almost, I would say, of working in the humanities and social sciences, because we don't have much funding to begin with. So we need to be more creative already in order to publish open access and to encourage open access. So there are indeed a few options out there. And I think ideally we also work towards solutions where authors don't have to pay. So one of those, for instance, is a sort of a sponsored model. We have 30 full open access journals that are sort of sponsored by third parties. So authors don't have to pay to publish there at all. The other one is what we also briefly discussed just now, institutional agreements. These are also usually for journals. We have 4 of those agreements now, one in the UK, one in the Netherlands, one in Sweden, and one with the University of Austria in Vienna. And those actually allow authors, affiliated to those universities, to publish in all of our journals also free of charge. And we now have nearly 400 journals. So, I think those are those kind of library agreements where, behind the scenes, the idea is that subscription spending is transitioned into open access spending. So, also so that, an option that's more or less cost neutral. Libraries don't have to spend more, and over time they spend on open access. And those are, I briefly see the chat, so I'll just respond to that directly. Those are indeed the consortia agreements. So I think for authors that's also a very
explain what can, for those who aren't familiar, what consortia agreements are.
Yeah, sure. So that's those institutional agreements. So a consortium is a group of university libraries on a national level. And they usually negotiate, definitely in Europe, they negotiate with publishers, with the bigger publishers, for these agreements. So it's kind of on a large scale for both open access. So typically they negotiate agreements about both open access as well as subscriptions. So in case of Brill, what the UK consortium JISC, for instance, they say for the UK universities, they get the full Brill collection, all of our journals, and also authors can publish in open access for free in all of those journals. So that's what such a deal looks like in short.
Interesting. So in that model, from what I understand, really it's the universities that will be, taking on the long-term burdens of open access, but in theory, it, evens itself out with the money that they're saving from, the library costs of purchasing the access to that research that they've been doing until now. I've also seen, maybe this is more in the sciences, but I've also seen that, grant funding bodies who have, where you can now request open access as one of your budgetary requests. So I wonder if that's another avenue for open access funding is when you are applying for a grant or, from at least certain grant funders to include that in the budget.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the first thing that I would say there is always check carefully when you are applying for a grant. Always check carefully what the funder offers, because some funders actually offer a separate budget for just for open access publishing. So then you don't have to include it in your own grant. You can simply apply for this budget whenever you need it, provided that you receive the grant, of course. But indeed, if you are supposed to include it in your grant budget, think about that. Think about whether you want to publish in open access, which publications do you want to publish in open access. And actually, I also really encourage researchers to reach out to us, to publishers, because we can help you with a budget. We can help you with kind of a publishing strategy. Doesn't mean, in case of Brill, but it doesn't mean you have to publish everything with Brill. Of course, we understand that usually authors or researchers want to publish with different publishers, but just to support you. And also, if you do want to publish some of that output with Brill, then we can also talk about kind of we can lump it all together. We can maybe talk about a discount, or maybe make a kind of a deal basically for that output.
Yes, I was gonna ask you about that. Just as a follow-up, are there, it's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of like a marketplace, where there's that number, and then you ask yourself, okay, all right, they're asking for $2,500. Is there an expectation from the publisher's end that the author is going to come back and start negotiating with that rate? How much of the rates set in stone versus how much are they negotiable? Would you recommend negotiating, and how, what should that process look like? I think especially, researchers, we don't necessarily tend to be the most aggressive business people out there. And I think that, maybe that could be a bit intimidating to feel like, okay, well, is it appropriate to ask for a discount? Like, how would you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's also a really good question. And I mean, the short answer is there's always room for negotiation. I mean, definitely for the larger projects, if you will. So with that, I mean a book, or maybe a special issue, but even a journal article. If you have maybe some budget, but you don't have the full budget, then do by all means reach out, definitely to Brill. I can't vouch for other publishers, of course, but in our case, the charges we have, they are based on sort of standard calculations, but it really depends per project what that project needs and what the individual costs are, and there may well be some margin for flexibility and for haggling. So do haggle. We are also very happy to haggle.
Fantastic. All right. Can you talk for a minute about there are different kinds of journals, and I think this is where people can get a bit confused. I know that people come across gold options, green options. Sounds like a leprechaun. And also, hybrid journals. So can you just organize for us a little bit what the different terms are, and how they should be understood when going to submit your research?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's just as a side note, I mean, when I was thinking about this, and I feared this would come up, and I think that these terms are one of the reasons that open access can seem so complex, because they're really niche, and they maybe serve a purpose to some people but not to others, and they just make it all maybe unnecessarily complicated. But I'll do my best to explain it briefly. So basically, a hybrid journal is what I think most researchers would recognize as a regular subscription journal. So it's sold via subscription, and the term hybrid comes from the idea that most articles will be published as regular articles, and they can be accessed if someone has access to that journal via their library who has a subscription. But it also publishes open access articles. So that's where the term hybrid comes from. And with regards to colors, I mean, that's even more sort of, dazzling to me. Where does that even come from? But I think with gold, that's probably what when I talk about open access, that's what gold is really what I mean with open access. So it's gold means that the final version, the published version, is available in open access with the license. But of course, on the other hand, with gold, there is some funding needed somewhere, because we can't sell the publication anymore. So one way or another, we recoup the costs either via an agreement or via crowdfunding or any other mechanism. And with green, that's another story. So with green, your publication is published with the publisher as it would. It's sold, if it's a book, it's just sold regularly, or if it's a journal, it's just a subscription in a subscription journal. But the author and green is also really with the author, so the author can then archive usually their manuscripts in the repository, usually of the university, but can also be another repository, maybe a subject repository that's relevant to them, or a fund repository. But yeah, of course, you don't have there the sort of the benefit with the citations and the impact.
Right. So I have so many questions, but I know that we are limited in time, and there's another important topic that I want to get to, but I feel like we're a little bit in the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can explore here. So I do encourage everyone to continue researching and and asking us questions afterwards as well. Okay, I want to get to an important topic, which is predatory publishers. From what I understand, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, what has happened is a very, maybe probably something that wouldn't have been predicted or couldn't have been anticipated or wasn't anticipated, which is that because of this model whereby journals or publishers are charging before an article is published, and not to libraries, but to individual authors, there have been what I guess we would call scam artists who have put up fake journals. And when I say fake journals, there's a debate right now about how you define a fake journal, but let's just say it's journals who don't go through a thorough peer review process, journals who oftentimes will simply take the text that you send them and just put it straight up on their website, journals that don't have an editing and review system in place. And those are known as predatory publishers. Now, there are also publishers that are sort of vanity publishers, which are publishers that maybe do charge, that do have a proper review process and are a little bit different. But I want to focus for today on the topic of predatory publishers. So it seems like they've basically seen an opportunity to make a quick buck and are taking money from scholars to put in their journals or their series, but really all they're doing is just putting it up on a website, which doesn't cost them any more than $2 a month to host. So this is sort of an unintended consequence, collateral damage of open access. It's not, I wouldn't blame open access for it, but can you just talk a little bit about this trend and this phenomenon and what authors should do to protect themselves and make sure that they're not falling into this trap?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it indeed is an unfortunate side effect of sort of the APC model. So where you, if you publish an article in open access, you pay a fee, and they are proliferating. Well, really anywhere, to be honest, and also a lot of authors. Recently, we had, I think, a Brill author who shared a story that they fell for it a couple of years ago, and their methods are so cunning. One of the things that they do is indeed that they, for instance, they take the title of the journal is super reminiscent of a title of a similar journal in the field that's very well known, very established. So people are really tricked into these things, and it's really cunning. I think the one thing that I would always recommend to anyone is to check the directory of open access journals. They're really the index for open access journals and also the one source. And they have a very rigorous and strict quality control in place before they admit any new journals, like you say, Avi, which is really all about, editorial procedures and peer review, and just to basically making sure that any journal that is admitted there is the real deal, so to speak. So if a journal is not listed in there, then I would always already be cautious, and also check with some colleagues of yours whether they know the journal, have they published there, and all the things that you just mentioned, Avi. And also, indeed about payment, you should never, usually, or I think nearly with basically all publishers, you only pay once your article has been accepted for publication. So you don't have to pay, whenever you're submitting, but only once it's been accepted.
Yeah, I think a few other things that I've noticed are, scholars who get inundated with emails. If you get an email from someone you don't know and you look them up and they don't seem to have a serious reputation online, it's not connected to anyone in your field, that should be suspicious. If there's a journal website has a lot of grammatical mistakes, as their English is poor, it could be a sign. Always look at the editorial board, assuming the people in your field. Are they reputable? Are these universities that and are familiar with? And then there are some lists online which are upkept, such as Beale's list, where you have scholars who are basically putting up, names of journals that are suspect. That being said, they proliferate so fast that sometimes it's kind of hard to keep track. Even if even if you try, it might not be on the list. The fact that it's on the list doesn't mean necessarily that it's a reputable publisher. So definitely keep that in mind. There's a lot more to say about that as well, but I really do want to get to people's questions because I know that there are some good questions here. Before we do that, I just want to bring everyone's attention. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Again, for our upcoming events, we have, so just give me 1 second here. There's every month we have a session. So if you enjoyed this one, please do be on the lookout for our upcoming events. Here you can see the events for June and July. Next month, I'm very excited to be hosting Marshall Poe, who's the editor-in-chief of the New Books Network. I don't know if you're familiar with the New Books Network. It's a series of podcasts in different fields about new books that come out in that field, and he was the founder and visionary behind that. So he's going to discuss how scholars can use new media to maximize the impact of their research. It's not enough today just to publish and hope the publisher does everything for you. I'm sure Stephanie will attest to the fact that the more authors are involved in getting their research out, the more successful it is in the end of the day. So we'll be discussing that in June. And then in July, I'm going to be speaking with two wonderful editors from Oxford University Press about publishing with your career in mind. How do you think about publishing in a way which not only is beneficial in the short term, but can be very beneficial in the long term as well, and help scholars to promote their careers. You know, some scholars want to become well-known figures in general society. Some scholars prefer to just be left on their own and move ahead in the academic world. So we're going to talk about how to position yourself in an effective way. So that's going to be in June, July. Please do sign up. Free as always. Well, as always, and will always be free. And here's our contact information, both for Stephanie and myself. If you do have any questions that we didn't have time, I saw we had a lot of questions, which is great. That's a sign that people are interested and engaged, and that's wonderful. If we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. It's not because it's not important. It's we're just limited in time. So please do reach out. We're both very accessible. My wife likes to joke that I am too available to my clients. So please do be in touch if you do have any questions or follow-up, etc. My apologies, 1 second. Again, just quickly, if you do have any needs for academic translation, academic editing help, or writing consulting, or help with academic reviews for your research, help putting together book proposal, grant projects, these are all areas where we can help authors and we can help scholars. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with me if you have any questions. If you want to find out more, you're welcome to just visit our website and check that out in your free time. We've helped a lot of wonderful Braille authors with their research, and we very much enjoy doing so. All right, I think that should bring us. Let me just double check here in my notes. My apologies. Yes, that will bring us to our Q&A. So thank you everyone again for submitting your questions via the chat. I recommend that people stick around because there are some really interesting questions here that I think will be relevant to everyone. Okay, I want to start out with this one because it's more of a philosophical question. The question is as follows: open access clearly impacts the way scholarship is distributed and read after it's being produced. But do you think that in any way it actually impacts the way research is being done or scholarly writing is being produced in the first place? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think open access, first of all, really, because it's immediately accessible, so it does accelerates the speed with which people access research, and also accelerates, the sort of, I think in the longer term, it also improves the effectiveness of how researchers collaborate. They can collaborate more quickly. I think actually the COVID crisis was a good example of that. And I can see that ultimately maybe it will also sort of change how research is produced itself, but that's more to do with sort of the traditional form, and there is a lot of debate around that. And I think no one has that answer now. We'll just have to see how things develop. Will we move to kind of larger sort of publishing platforms, or will we still stick to sort of journal brands, which are also kind of communities? So there's also something to be said for that. Same for books, a book series, of course. When you talk about books, there's always a lot of talk about, maybe open access will mean a more free form book book form. So instead of kind of the book form that we have, maybe very sort of different online reading experience. But I think, those things are more sort of longer term. For now, that we are still, I hope that we can still find pragmatic solutions for the questions that we have today. But yeah, it's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think also in terms of, I know I've had conversations with Chris Harrison from Cambridge, who's told me that, there's a certain dynamic, that I think they're defining as dynamic content, so the fact that content is being hosted online just on itself enables people to update and to change and to, make things more relevant as time goes along. Whereas maybe, more traditionally things, once you publish something, it's set in stone and there's no changing it ever, unless it's retracted. Here it's sort of seen as more of a living document, which I also think is very helpful for scholars who have trouble. I know we work with a lot of scholars who have trouble sort of separating themselves and saying, okay, it's ready to go off to print, because there's always what to improve and to change. And this enables scholars to kind of be updating their research, even if they're working on something else. But if they find that they have something that's, interesting and of note, they can kind of work, it's a living document as opposed to something which is just, kind of set in stone. Okay, let's take, I want to push you on a topic that we discussed, but I want to give you a particular scenario and ask you how you deal with it. Let's say there's an author who has checked all their, they've checked their, with their department, or maybe they're unaffiliated, they're independent authors, and they've tried to get funding for their open access, and they've looked and they tried with the grant funders and they got rejected, and they just have not had success. Is it, are there individual, granting programs, either in Braille or just in general, to help scholars in that situation with open access? Or might it be better in that scenario to just tell scholars, in that case, just go and publish traditionally because might be too much?
Yeah, it really depends. There are so there are sort of unorthodox, fund budgets and pots that sometimes authors can apply for. We also try to kind of source them. And another thing is, one really other thing, but that's really only for books, is we work with an organization called Knowledge Unlatched, and they organize crowdfunding for books, for open access books. So we also participate in that. It's a yearly recurring thing, and we also participate in that. So that is always a good option for authors with books who really want to publish in open access, but they don't have access to funding. But yeah, other than that, indeed sometimes the only conclusion is that there is no money available, and then unfortunately we would need to publish kind of traditionally. But we try to exhaust all the options before we come to that decision. Yeah.
And are there specific fields that where open access is more or less prevalent, or more or less relevant? Specifically, is there a distinction between maybe the humanities, social sciences, and more of the STEM fields? Do you find that there's more research that's being published in one or the other that's open or less open, or do you find that it's more appropriate for one or the other? How do you, yeah.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, there are definitely some fields, for instance, linguistics, that is really a field that has traditionally, I think, always been very proactive with open access and very keen to publish open access. So you can see there that's also, and as a result, and that's, it's also because because researchers have really, they triggered that. So publishers also try to experiment with new models to respond to that demand, if you will. So definitely that's a good example where that happened. But I think on the whole, you do see also in humanities and social sciences as a whole, there most fields are now kind of, I think, in a comparable sort of development, although there is indeed a difference between humanities, social science on the one hand, and the STEM fields on the other hand, and that's really funding, I think, down to that. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, I want to wrap up with one last question, which I think is a good way to sort of summarize our conversation. If you could just touch on, without getting into too much detail, what Plan S is and what that means within the greater context of what the future, how you see the future of academic publishing. Do you think that in 5-10 years, we're not even going to use the word open access because that's just going to be the default that everyone is doing? Do you think that it's still going to be, you know, a split between, you know, more traditional models and open models? And what role does Plan S, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what Plan S is. What role do you think that will play, or other similar initiatives will play in changing and formulating policy about open access?
Yeah, yeah. Let me just start with what Plan S is. I think it's another kind of in-crowd thing, almost. But it is a set of guidelines produced by 11 European research funders to sort of further develop their own open access policies. And it's for both journals as well as books. It came into effect. The policy for books has not been announced just yet, but the policy for journals, journal articles, has. That was came into effect in January this year. And I think one of the key elements of Plan S, and that kind of, I guess, directly relates also to, you know, the potential impact that they have, is that journals need to show some kind of commitment to transition to open access in due course. You know, and that is something that is really interesting, where you can really go into that, but I don't think we have the time for that today. But there are a number of ways that publishers can do that. One of them is actually via those consortia agreements that we just discussed. So that's another reason that we're really happy that we're able to do that, because it also means that we, yeah, and you know, I think what every publisher, of course, wants is to continue to offer authors an option to publish with them, but also to make sure that they can comply with this policy. So, you know, we at Brill, we've been working really hard to make sure that that is the case. And yeah, I mean, I hope that for authors it's more or less seamless. You know, they don't have to worry too much about it. It's also, if you think about it more broadly, it's almost because these funders already had an open access policy in place. So, you know, it's not like there won't even be such a change for authors from that perspective. It's almost more of a conversation between publishers and funders than it really is about the policy itself. But yeah, having said that, you know, I think 5 to 10 years is actually not a very long time. I think if you look a little bit further ahead, then I can see that open access could be predominant, or maybe it's even unavoidable. But what we need, of course, is global buy-in, and that is really the key. What's missing at the moment, also what Plan S is missing. I mean, it's 11 European research funders. They are not responsible for the majority of the research published. There is, of course, also open access activity in the US and also some in Asia, but they're also, you know, that not there are still large kind of pieces of the puzzle missing, and that's really something that well, I certainly hope that will, you know, grow in the decade to come. But that's really what needs to happen. Institutions around the world need to kind of flip their own spending, not on products, but on open access. And that's kind of the mindset change, I suppose, that needs to happen. And whether it will, I mean, I certainly hope it does, of course, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Brilliant, brilliant. Stephanie, I really want to thank you very much. I know that I learned a tremendous amount over the last hour, and you know, and I deal with this on a daily basis, but there was a lot that I didn't know, and I imagine that, you know, I speak on behalf of the attendees as well, that we learned a lot from your insight and from being willing to share openly about, you know, both the triumphs but also challenges of open access. I thank everyone for their participation. I mean, this was quite a lively chat, which was great, and that's exactly what I want to see is people getting involved and asking questions and debating back and forth. I wish we had time to play all these out, you know, in their full glory, but we don't necessarily have that time. So thank you everyone again for coming. You please do feel free to reach out to us if you do have further questions or just want to learn more. I know that we're going to be sending out a recording with some additional resources over the next few days. So be on the lookout for that, and make sure that you know, take a look and then share it with any colleagues who weren't able to be here. So thanks everyone for coming. I know it's you know, some of us are zoomed out after so many Zoom sessions and having you know, and taking and being exhausted from what was from the last year and a half. So I appreciate you making the time to join us today, and look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. So thanks, Stephanie, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was really great to be here.
Thank you, everyone.